They say, history is written by the victors. But sometimes, the victors are nothing more than shadows, hiding behind fire and ruin. Tonight, I will tell you of a chapter erased from the books, whispered only in the darkest hours, when the world itself forgets to breathe. It begins in the late winter of 1623, in a land drowned in fog and the blood of forgotten men. The chronicles call it the famine of Eastmoor, a countryside pressed beneath the iron sky of England. Yet the truth is darker than hunger. This is the tale of a manor house, where loyalty and betrayal dissolved, where the walls themselves seemed to groan under the weight of confessions never spoken. The Lord of Eastmoor, Sir Alistair Wren, was no common noble. In his veins flowed the proud blood of warriors, men who had fought under banners long turned to dust. But in his heart, there lived a gnawing dread that his inheritance was cursed. For years he watched his lands decay, harvests failing, rivers turning sour, livestock dying without reason. And then, as if summoned by some hidden debt, a band of starving peasants gathered at his gates, demanding bread. Sir Alistair gave them none. To yield, he believed, was to admit weakness. And weakness, he thought, would only invite ruin. That night, the crowd dispersed. But the whispers did not. They said the Wren family had bargained with powers older than the church, older than the very stones of the manor. They said the famine was not sent by heaven, but by the sins of one man. Lady Eleanor, his wife, wrote in her journal that she dreamt of a figure at the edge of the orchard, tall, shrouded, carrying a lantern with no flame. And each time she woke, the smell of damp earth clung to her chamber, as though the dream had seeped into the living world. Their son, Thomas, scarcely 12, began speaking in a tongue no tutor could name. Not Latin, not Greek, but something more ancient. Something that made their ears ache with every sound. And the servants, loyal through decades of toil, began to vanish. One by one, without struggle, without a trace. By the third disappearance, even the most faithful maid crossed herself before entering the halls. But Alistair forbade prayer. Faith, he said, was a chain, and chains had no place in the house of Wren. So the family fell into silence. Each dinner became a funeral feast without a corpse. Each hallway a tomb, echoing with footsteps that belonged to no one. Still, Alistair clung to his pride. He believed he could outlast the famine, outlast the whispers, outlast the shadows. But those who endure famine know the truth. It is not the empty stomach that kills first. It is the erosion of trust. The peasants, starving, turn to fury. And when men starve, they remember every slight, every injustice, every door closed against them. They gathered once more at Eastmoor, not with pleas, but with torches. Alistair faced them from the balcony, sword gleaming in the moonlight. He swore no mob could break the house of Wren. Yet even as he spoke, Eleanor wrote, his hands trembled. She wrote, "I saw the hunger in his eyes, not for bread, nor for power, but the hunger of a man who knows his fate, and dares it to come." That night, the gates were breached. The torches roared. And from the orchard's shadows came the figure Eleanor had dreamt of. Lanternless, faceless, walking slowly toward the flames, as though drawn by a destiny older than famine itself. The night after the peasants gathered, a storm rolled across Eastmoor. Lightning split the sky, and for a brief moment, the manor stood like a skeleton, illuminated against the heavens. Inside, Eleanor sat awake, her candle guttering in the drafts that seeped through the stone. She wrote of whispers crawling along the rafters, voices that did not belong to the living. When she pressed her hand to the page, she felt the wood beneath her desk tremble, as though the house itself longed to confess. Thomas wandered the corridors barefoot, his eyes wide, lips moving. The words he spoke were sharp, like shards of ice. Eleanor tried to hold him, but his skin was fevered, his gaze fixed on something only he could see. The boy spoke of a man in the orchard, taller than the trees, carrying no lantern, but surrounded by a glow that was not fire. He said the man whispered promises, that the famine would end if Thomas opened the door at midnight. Alistair forbade such talk. He struck his son across the cheek and ordered the servants to bolt every door. But the servants were fewer now, and those who remained crossed themselves in secret. That evening, a scream cut the silence. One of the maids was found in the courtyard, her eyes wide, her mouth full of soil. No wound, no blood, just the earth itself crammed between her teeth, as if she had tried to swallow the land. Eleanor begged Alistair to send for a priest, but Alistair's pride was iron. He swore the family of Wren would not kneel before Rome, nor confess weakness to men who had never bled for Eastmoor. Still, he did not sleep. He wandered the manor by torchlight, his reflection fractured in every darkened window. And as dawn broke, he swore he saw footprints, leading from the orchard to his very door. That morning, the air was heavy with ash. The peasants returned, silent this time, their faces hollowed by hunger, their hands gripping stones instead of prayers. The manor gates shuddered under the weight of their blows. And as the hinges cracked, Thomas whispered from the staircase, "He is here." The gates of Eastmoor buckled, iron shrieking as if in pain. The peasants poured through, their torches spitting fire into the dawn. Alistair stood in the great hall, sword in hand, pride burning brighter than any flame. He roared that the blood of Wren would never kneel, that the house had stood against famine, against kings, against time itself. But his words drowned beneath the roar of hunger. The mob surged forward, faces gaunt, eyes hollow, voices breaking like thunder. Eleanor clutched Thomas to her chest, her whispers of prayer lost in the chaos. And then, the torches died. Not one by one, but all at once, snuffed out as though swallowed by an unseen hand. Darkness devoured the hall. The only sound was breathing, ragged, desperate, terrified. And then footsteps, slow, deliberate, echoing across the stones. The peasants fell silent. Even Alistair froze, his knuckles white upon the hilt of his sword. From the shadows of the orchard doorway, a figure emerged. Tall, shrouded, lanternless, faceless. And yet the air shimmered around it, as though the night itself bent in obedience. Thomas broke free of his mother's grasp. He walked toward the figure, his small steps echoing like drums of fate. The boy's voice rang out, in that ancient tongue no man could name. The mob recoiled, crossing themselves. But none dared to touch the child. Alistair shouted his son's name. But the words shattered into silence, as the faceless figure raised its hand. In that gesture, the air grew heavy, thick with the scent of soil and ash. Every torch reignited at once. Not with fire, but with black flame. Screams filled the hall. The peasants fell to their knees. Not in worship, but in terror. Eleanor collapsed beside the altar. Her journal clutched to her chest. She wrote that the flames cast no light. That shadows deepened instead, and in those shadows she saw faces. Faces long dead, staring back at her. And Alistair, for the first time, trembled. His pride cracked like the walls of the manor. And he dropped to one knee, before the faceless figure. The hall burned with black fire. Yet not a single stone turned to ash. The flames danced, but they consumed nothing. As if hunger itself had taken form. Thomas knelt before the faceless figure. His voice, still a child's, echoed with tones that belonged to no age of man. He spoke of bargains sealed in blood, and of a debt the Wren family could never repay. Eleanor cried out, but her words shattered in her throat. For when she looked upon her son, his eyes were no longer his own. Alistair, still kneeling, lifted his sword with trembling hands. He swore he would sever the curse, even if it meant severing his own blood. The faceless figure did not move. It only watched, or perhaps it listened, to the breaking of a father's soul. With a cry that shook the rafters, Alistair struck. Steel met flesh, and the hall fell silent. When Eleanor opened her eyes, she saw Thomas lying still, his blood pooling upon the stones. Alistair's sword clattered from his grasp, his pride broken, his line extinguished. The faceless figure turned and walked into the orchard, its steps soundless, its presence fading like smoke into fog. By dawn, the famine was over. The rains returned, the earth softened, and the fields of Eastmoor bloomed once more. But the manor stood empty. The peasants whispered that the curse had been lifted. That sacrifice had appeased the shadows. Yet none dared to enter its halls, for they swore the stones still wept with blood. Centuries later, travelers spoke of a ruin in Eastmoor. Walls crumbled, windows hollow, and an orchard where no fruit would ever grow. Some say, on nights when the sky is strangled by storm, a child's voice can be heard, chanting in a tongue older than memory. Others swear they have seen a lanternless shape, watching from between the trees. And so the tale of Eastmoor endures, a chapter unwritten by victors, but carved into stone by sorrow. A reminder that pride can damn a house, and that hunger wears many faces.